Hello there. Well, I am sorry that this has been perhaps my most negligent, longest pause ever. Thank you to the one person who texts me once in a while saying, "Are you going to do another reading? You know who you are." And I think, what's exciting about today, it's your reward for sticking with me through these long gaps, is I think today we're going to get out of part one. We'll end at the end of part one. So let's get to it. Experience. I was swallowed by a hippo. There was no transition at all, no sense of approaching danger. It was as if I had suddenly gone blind and deaf. A few years ago, she thought, that story would have made a sensation. It would have been all anybody talked about for weeks, the sudden breach, the tooth of a new reality against the rib cage, the greeny black smell of being lost in some ultimate aquarium. But now they had all been swallowed by a hippo. Big deal. That's life. You have a totally dead look on your face, her husband observed as he watched her engage in mortal online combat with a person who had chosen, out of all combinations of words in the universe, the username Henry Higgins was an abuser. Like a ventriloquist's dummy, like a doll that haunts kids, just totally, totally dead. Her feelings, such as they were hurt. He was always saying things like this just when she was at her most alive. Her cousin, born the odd year before her, was autistic at a time when they still blamed refrigerator mothers. Before he got too strong and was sent away, her aunt had built for him in the basement of her mansion a miniature kitchen. It was thought somehow that this bright and well-ordered corner of verisimilitude would help him break into real life. Little T-bones shaped like South America, dewy ears of corn, false cans with actual labels. But he cared nothing for this. He cared only for music. He slapped his temples to the pulse, and as he grew taller and turned the beat louder and louder, it became clear they had it all backward. Real life was in him, trying to burst the miniaturization of the body, little T-bones, dewy ears. Something else, something odd, that they made him wear a little computer around his neck with all the letters of the alphabet on it, as though he was nonverbal. They believed he would be led either by the desire in their faces or the holiness of the random or some force of insistence in English itself to eventually type what they called a real word. That the unmeaning machine would one day produce a phrase like Europe is a fag, and that the next time she saw her father, he would, with utter seriousness, while placing a hand on her shoulder and staring earnestly into her eyes, pronounce the words, Europe is a fag, while waiting for the bell of resonance to ring in her too. That after all, her father would say, pointing to the unmeaning machine, it was the only one that told the truth. That she might stand there speechless, then turn to her own unmeaning machine for a response, accept the piece of paper it spat happily into her hand, and tell him to go suck a poisoned pussy, sweetie. Was it entirely his fault? Lately, it seemed every man on the planet was about to burst from a supplement sold to him by another man with exactly the same set of opinions. Mom, I want you to check Dad's medicine cabinet, she said one day during her weekly call. Check and make sure he's not secretly taking some supplement with a bullshit name like Destroy Her with Logic 5000 plus niacin. A coughing fit interrupted her interrogation. One of her morning nootropics had lodged sideways in her throat, and there was no washing it down for love or money. As it subsided, she heard her mother striding briskly down the upstairs hallway, heard her opening the mirror that cut your face in two. I don't see anything. Why do you ask? I'm worried about him. Ever since the election, he's just been so red. Oh, darling, he's always been that way, her mother reassured her over the sound of her continued wheezing. Even back when I first met your father, he was the reddest man I've ever known. Yeah, your dad is completely brainwashed, her husband claimed, easing himself down onto a skateboard with a yelp of agony and rolling himself gingerly from the living room to the kitchen. He could no longer walk normally because of a new exercise regimen that he referred to as dog crap training and practiced in total secrecy at a cult-adjacent gym known as the Zoo. She had asked for further explanation, but he refused to give it. Her father had played Westerns to make the afternoon last longer. As long as John Wayne walked down Main Street, the sun stayed in the sky. She tried it. It still worked. Big red-boned dogs lazed and stretched in his voice. His Wikipedia entry, open on her phone, told of every bad thing he had ever done, and the cancer he had got filming downwind from a nuclear test site in Utah. As long as he was on the television, he was born 100 times and named Marion. Joan Didion continued to interview him in Mexico. His gravestone was perpetually etched with the words, Tomorrow is the most important thing in life, comes into us at midnight very clean. And the afternoon lasted, and she posted a picture of him in yellowface dressed as Genghis Khan, and she stood in her shadow at high noon on Main Street, and tomorrow did not come. Our politicians had never been so authentic, so linked arm in arm with the common people. My favorite meat is hot dog, by the way, one told us. That is my favorite meat. My second favorite meat is hamburger. And everyone says, oh, don't you prefer steak? It's like, I know steaks are great, but I like hot dog best, and I like hamburger next best. And we shivered with recognition, and a vague vote grew solid in our hands, for we too liked hot dog best and hamburger next best. We were the common people on whom it all rested, and we lived in diners, and we went to church at the gas station, and our mother was a dirty mattress in the front yard, and we liked, God damn it, hot dog best. It's nonsense, a man hollered at her, rising unsteadily on his cane. He had read about the event in the physical newspaper. He signed every one of his texts, Love Grandpa. It's not nonsense, it's folk art, she hollered back. Like those early American women who painted kids with enormous foreheads, either because they didn't know how to paint regular foreheads or because it was a stylistic choice. Buried deep in the thread to a post that said, white culture is when someone's like, I'm a music man, is where you would find the truth about modern America. And like all truths, it was almost impossible to look upon. Still, a hot shame often kindled in her breast when she skimmed those discussions, for she had not realized the California raisins were racist until she was 22 years old. If she had gone to college, she would have figured out when she was 18, yet another thing her parents hate her for. She was ovulating and posted a photo of herself in a bikini with the disturbing caption, God's little dog treat. Her mother called exactly 14 minutes later. You're not an atheist, are you? She asked. That's not what I meant, she assured her, and explained that the post was actually kind of Christian. Her body was trying to knock itself up, the only way it knew how. The golden age of air travel had entered its twilight. She could feel it in her bones on liftoff and landing. They often sat for hours now on runways. Flight attendants cast a cold eye at her as she snuck back to the bathroom to drink vodka from a shampoo bottle. And after a 7-hour plane ride, as everyone rose from their seats with furrowed foreheads and dirty fur, she could already see what they would look like as a post-apocalyptic mole people. Still, in every airport she visited, there was a small nameless brown bird flying end to end, dipping and gliding through the tree trunks of passengers, singing a song of territory that must cover the entire map, countries, cities, seas, and skies. That the shorthand we developed to describe something could slowly, brightly wiggle into an example of what it described, brainworms, until the whole phenomenon contracted to a single gray inch, galaxy brain, until something starry exploded. Her wish for the next generation was for them to be spared an age when numbers got sick, swarmed, clumped together, went plummeting off cliffs, and the numbers were human beings. But could what they had started be stopped? Even across the ocean, the simulation flapped like a flag in the sky, rippling with the moon and red sun and the stars, and a sign on the side of the road was spray painted, "What else?" with the words that had made it everywhere, flat earth. You know this baby's gonna be a world traveler, bitch, her sister would write in response to the steady flow of pictures from overseas. She's gonna go everywhere and see everything, gonna get her every stamp in her passport. And each time, without fail, she responded, if the world is still here when she gets here, ha ha. A certain look used to come over her aunt's face as she crossed and held her son's wrists behind his back in that imitation kitchen full of imitation food. It made her wonder if she ought to have children, for anything could happen. And you didn't know if you were up to it. How could you know if you were up to it? But she thought just as often of a little girl with pigtails who came running down the aisle of a plane toward her once and patted her all over her arms and legs as she passed. And it was like a soft rain of blue, bruiseless plums. She felt the surprise of it long after the girl was gone. And as she contemplatively sipped vodka from a shampoo bottle in the bathroom, a bloom came suddenly all over her skin. Maybe she was up to it, after all. I was with you. I felt I was a part of it until you made the joke about the humpback. And the last woman in line turned, and through the sunshine yellow of her shirt, she could see the hump on her back, which looked exactly like her grandmother's, crested and high on the left side. And for the rest of the day, the words echoed in her ears. I was with you. I felt I was a part of it. And why had she made that joke in the first place, when her grandmother had a hump, for God's sake, when she had memorized its contours, when she could still feel it under the slow, trustful circling of her childish hands? It was a relief, even as she was chained to it, to see how her little window found a way to look out on the eternal mysteries, how she had ordered an inexplicable plate of German potato salad that night, 2 years ago now, before anything had happened, and then received a text telling her that her grandmother had passed, whose own recipe had called for bacon, sugar, white vinegar, boiled eggs, and some old-fashioned and crucial punctuation she'd always neglected to add. Celery seed, perhaps? I was eating a bloomin' onion at Outback when it happened, the text told her. She would have wanted it that way. You're doing the decent thing, the excitable priest had barked at the funeral. He believed the modern world had no respect for its elders and consequently had forgotten about God, the oldest man alive. Nowadays, a parent dies, the kids roll them up in a carpet and bury them in the backyard like a chihuahua. That was all wrong, she thought, puzzled. There was nothing people loved, respected, cherished more on the mantelpiece in a brass urn than a chihuahua. He would know that if he ever went online. There's nothing modern about this, she had thought as she listened, sat, stood, knelt, allowed her body and her voice to remember the ritual. Grief must belong to its own circle of time, but then she swept her eyes to the side and saw her father ceaselessly vaping at the end of the family pew, just sucking like a hungry baby on a long futuristic black pipe, and then lifting his head toward the domed ceiling and seeming to exhale great white clouds of his mother's soul. What are we going to tell our grandkids? She asked her brother, twirling a non-existent phone cord between her finger and thumb. The same thing they told us, he reflected. Yeah, I was in the shit. Yeah, I was out there barking at police dogs. Yeah, I went in the portal and told the dictator to change my diaper. A few years ago, her husband had bought her a DNA test. Before anyone knew, they were collecting all the results in a huge database so they could eventually send your distant cousin to prison for stealing a loaf of bread. She spat feebly into a little vial and sent it away, and it came back that she was descended from the filles du roi, lower class French women who were shipped overseas to fuck Canada out of the beaverish wilderness. This explains so much about you, her husband had groaned. This explains everything. And maybe it did. She saw her DNA streaming backward from her body like a timeline, richly peopled with the faces of distant cousins behind bars, and she was somehow the one who had put them there, by moving the clock another age past them, by being born at all. She had once shared a stage with a man who stood and laughed in the voice of his great grandfather for 5 full minutes, even to the point of falling backward and rolling on the floor as he cackled. He had explained earlier that his ancestors were always with him when he performed. When he finished, she smoothed the daisies on her dress and walked up to the microphone and said, blinking against the personal spotlight, I cannot even tell you how much my ancestors are not up with me here right now. But then almost as a serious laugh, a strength entered her voice and she stood like a tree with a spirit in it. And she opened a portal where her mouth was and spoke better than she had ever before. And as she rushed like blood back and forth in the real artery, she saw that ancestors weren't just behind, they were the ones who were to come. The moon fell into her window and woke her. Every morning at 4 a.m., a prehistoric sense of duty, danger, and approaching wolves told her to get up and check the fire. She did, and the fire of the world still burned in its circle of stones, so she lay awake for an hour or two, trying to lull herself back to sleep. She imagined herself unfurling from a little brown seed and growing into a beanstalk, her mind rustling and thickening along every vine, that she was evolving into her present self from a single-celled organism amid humid, well-designed ferns. Unfolding once more in a belly with no thought of what life on the outside was like, the portal in another language, or before she had learned how to read. Strange, how the best things in the portal seemed to belong to everyone. There was no use in saying, that's mine, to a teenager, who had carefully cropped the face, name, and fingerprint out of your sentence. She loved it. The unitless free language inside her head had said it 100 times. It was hers. Your slice of life cut its cord and multiplied among the people. First nowhere and little, and then everywhere and large. No one and everyone. Can a blank be twins? The words that would send a sheet of flame up her body when she thought of posting them a year from now. What a time to be quote unquote alive. Look, here she is, her sister texted and attached a picture of her 20-week ultrasound where a thumbprint could be seen pressing itself orange against the dark. Look how big her head is, LOL. Hello, little alien, she responded. Welcome to this awful place. And that's the end of part 1. That section's really interesting. I think it's so much about, all that stuff with ancestors and then the internet as a place where your thought gets reproduced and claimed by others, and sort of tension between being part of a collective and shared consciousness online and whatever is left of us offline, if anything. So setting us up for part 2. Thanks for tuning in today. I promise to try my hardest to not wait so long before the next time. And until then, I hope you're well.